At 2:47 a.m., two Black Hawk helicopters shook the windows of Harborview Crest Medical Center and hit the wet asphalt outside the ER like thunder. Armed operators in full tactical gear poured through the sliding doors, weapons raised, boots pounding tile, not searching for a patient, searching for a nurse. The charge nurse dropped her clipboard. An orderly pressed himself against the wall. The SEAL commander walked straight past three attending physicians, scanned the trauma bay, locked eyes on a woman in plain blue scrubs, and said four words that stopped every heart in the room. "We need Phantom, now." Before you go any further, if this story already has your pulse up, follow along to the very end. Like this video, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go. The rain had been coming down since 11, not the soft kind that makes the city look cinematic, the kind that clogs drains and floods parking structures and turns the streets outside Harborview Crest into shallow rivers. The ER was loud in the way only a trauma center on a Thursday night can be loud. A man with a broken wrist arguing about his wait time, a teenager who'd taken something at a party being monitored in Bay 4, two attendings bickering near the supply closet about who'd signed off on a discharge that shouldn't have been signed. Normal chaos. Managed chaos. The kind Natalie Voss had learned to move through without touching the walls. She was restocking the crash cart near Bay 7 when the overhead lights flickered. Just once. She noticed. Most people didn't. Voss. Marcus, the night charge nurse, appeared at her elbow holding a tablet he clearly hadn't looked at in the last 3 minutes. "We've got a code incoming. Driver versus median barrier on Route 9, ETA 6 minutes. Vitals? Unstable. BP 60 over palp. Possible internal." Natalie snapped the cart drawer shut. "Get Ortega in here. Tell him to stop eating whatever he's eating in the lounge and put gloves on. He's going to complain. He always complains. Get him anyway." She didn't wait for Marcus to respond. She was already moving. That was the thing about Natalie that people who worked with her tended to notice eventually, even if they couldn't name it right away. She moved like she'd already been in the room she was walking into, like her body reached the next crisis 2 seconds before her feet did. Dr. Elliot Crane, the chief of trauma surgery and a man who had made it his quiet hobby to underestimate her, had once described her to a resident as efficient for a floor nurse. He'd meant it as a compliment. It landed the way he intended it to. She was 34 years old and had worked at Harborview Crest for 6 years. Before that, officially, she had worked at a regional hospital in western Pennsylvania. Before that, the paperwork got thin. She'd answered every HR question with clean, complete sentences and nothing extra. No one had pressed. Her locker held 2 things besides her street clothes: a photograph of a mountain range she never named when people asked, and a tattoo she kept covered. The tattoo ran from her left shoulder down to the inside of her elbow, not decorative, not sentimental in the obvious way. A series of marks, a sigil, and a name in lettering so small you'd have to already know what to look for. She wore long sleeves under her scrubs even in July. Nobody asked about that either. The trauma case from Route 9 came in at 12:18 a.m. and kept her occupied until nearly 2. The driver, a 41-year-old man named Gerald, had a ruptured spleen, 2 broken ribs, and the kind of terrified eyes that told her he understood, on some animal level, that he was close to the edge. She stayed with him through stabilization, through the handoff to surgical prep, through the moment when his blood pressure finally climbed back to something that didn't make her want to hold her breath. "You're going to be okay," she told him, and she meant it the way she always meant it. Not as reassurance, but as a clinical assessment. "You sure?" he said. His voice was hoarse. "Reasonably sure. Surgeons are good here." "What about you?" She looked at him. "I'll be in the building." That seemed to help. By 2:30 a.m., the ER had settled into its between-hours lull. The arguing man with the broken wrist had been treated and discharged. The teenager in Bay 4 was sleeping it off under observation. Natalie was at the nurse's station filling out documentation that should have been filled out 3 hours ago, drinking coffee that had gone cold without her noticing, when she heard it. Not the rain, not the automatic doors. Something under all of it. Rotors. She set the cup down. The sound built fast, Not one set of rotors, two. The specific deep percussion of military-grade aircraft running at low altitude in wet weather. She'd heard that sound over 3 different countries in a different part of her life, and her nervous system remembered it before her brain caught up. Her hands went still on the keyboard. Her eyes moved to the ceiling, then to the exterior windows, then to the ER entrance. The night security guard, a man named Denny, who was 62 and worked the overnight because his knees hurt too much for days, stood up from his chair near the entrance and squinted through the glass. Is that? The first Black Hawk came down in the ambulance bay. The second hit the overflow parking 30 yards east. The windows shook. The fluorescent light above Bay 3 buzzed and blinked. Someone in the back of the ER, an orderly, she thought, shouted something that wasn't a word. Natalie was already on her feet. The sliding doors opened. They came in fast and organized. 6 of them in the first wave, tactical gear, weapons at low ready, eyes moving in the sharp, practiced arcs of people who'd done room clearance enough times that it stopped requiring conscious thought. Behind them, 2 more carrying a stretcher. And behind the stretcher, a man in his late 40s with a jaw like quarried stone, and blood on the right side of his neck that he was either ignoring or hadn't noticed yet. The man with the jaw scanned the room once, the way you scan a room when you already have a picture of what you're looking for. His gaze moved past Dr. Crane, who had appeared from somewhere and was already straightening up with the automatic authority of someone who expected to be the most important person in any room he entered. Moved past Marcus, who was gripping the edge of the nurse's station with both hands. Moved past the 2 wide-eyed residents who'd materialized from the corridor. It landed on Natalie. She didn't move. He walked toward her, and the room got quiet the way rooms get quiet when everyone can feel something happening that they don't have the vocabulary for yet. "We need Phantom," he said. "Now." Nobody breathed. Natalie looked at him for a long moment. He had gray at his temples that hadn't been there last time she'd seen him. She was certain of that, even though she was also certain she was supposed to have forgotten that she'd ever seen him at all. "Commander Rourke," she said, not a question. "I'm going to need to know what you brought me," she said. He exhaled and something in his posture shifted. Not relief exactly, but the specific release of a man who has been carrying something heavy for several hours and has just been told he can put it down in a safe place. "3 operators," he said. 1 critical, 2 serious. We had a situation go sideways 40 miles out. No time to get to Ramstein, no time for anything else. Your name came up. My name isn't supposed to come up." "I know." She looked at the stretcher they'd carried in. The man on it was young. She registered that first, the way she always registered it. The way you never really stopped registering it, no matter how many times you saw it. Maybe 26, big through the shoulders, with a chest wound that someone had packed in the field with what looked like improvised gauze. The packing was holding, but not well. "Bay 1, she said. "Move." Dr. Crane materialized at her elbow. "Excuse me, I don't know who authorized this, but the chain of Not now. I'm the attending on Dr. Crane." She turned to look at him, just looked. Something in her face made him stop. "I need Bay 1 clear, and I need it clear in the next 30 seconds. Can you do that, or do you need someone else to do it?" Elliot Crane had been a trauma surgeon for 18 years. He had operated in the aftermath of 2 mass casualty events and testified before a hospital board 3 times. He was not accustomed to being spoken to this way by anyone below his pay grade, and especially not by a nurse he had spent 6 years regarding as competent but limited. He looked at her face and he moved out of the way. She didn't watch him go. She was already at the stretcher. Oops. The man's name, she learned in the next 4 minutes, was Specialist Garrett Lowe. 27. The chest wound was a through and through that had clipped the right lung and done something complicated to the pleural space. She could hear it in the quality of his breath, that wet, sucking tension that meant air was going where air wasn't supposed to go. Someone in the field had done an occlusive seal, and it was the right call, but it was slipping. "Who packed this?" she asked, without looking up. "I did." One of the operators near the door raised a hand. He had blood on his forearm that she was fairly sure was his own. She filed that away for later. "Good seal. Wrong tape. It's delaminating from the moisture." She was already resealing it, her hands moving with the precision of someone who has done this particular thing in conditions significantly worse than a fully equipped trauma bay. Hold his O2 mask. Not like that, like this. She adjusted the resident's grip without breaking rhythm. The resident, a second-year named Yolanda Ferris, had the look of someone experiencing a cognitive reboot, but she adjusted. BP? Natalie said. 82 over 50 and dropping, Yolanda said. Get me 2 large bore IVs and start a fluid challenge. Lactated ringers wide open until I tell you to stop. Should I call for a surgeon? I'm managing the airway and the pleural issue right now. Get me the kit for a needle decompression. Left side. She looked up at Garrett's face. He was conscious, barely. His eyes were tracking. Garrett, can you hear me? A blink. Good. I need you to stay with me. This is going to hurt for about 2 seconds, and then it's going to feel better, okay? Another blink. Okay, she said, and did what needed to be done. The sound, the hiss of released pressure, was immediate and unmistakable. Garrett's chest expanded properly for the first time since he'd come through the doors. His oxygen saturation, which had been trending toward catastrophic, stopped its fall and began carefully to climb. Yolanda said something under her breath that might have been an expletive. From somewhere behind her, Natalie heard Commander Rourke say quietly to one of his men, "There she is." She didn't react to that. There was too much left to do, Chasun. The second operator, a woman named Brianne Calloway, Staff Sergeant, Rourke told her, reconnaissance specialist, call sign Drift, had a shrapnel wound to the left thigh that had been tourniquet controlled in the field. The tourniquet was correct. The time on it was approaching the limit she was comfortable with. How long since application? Natalie asked. 63 minutes, said the operator who'd followed them in, the one with the blood on his forearm, who she was now increasingly certain was walking around with an injury he hadn't mentioned. What's your name? She said to him. Niles. Corporal Niles, you're bleeding. He looked at his arm. It's not bad. It's not catastrophic. Those aren't the same thing. Sit down before you decide it is bad, and we're busy. He sat. Brianne Calloway was awake and tight-jawed, the particular expression of someone managing serious pain through the specific discipline of people who'd been trained to manage serious pain. She looked at Natalie with dark, assessing eyes. Are you the one they called Phantom? Brianne asked. I need you to hold still, Natalie said. That's a yes, Brianne said, and went quiet. The thigh wound was deep, but the major vessels had been spared. She confirmed that with palpation and Doppler, a sound like a distant heartbeat that made her shoulders drop half an inch in relief. The tourniquet came off in controlled stages. She watched the wound, the color return, the pulse in the foot. Good. Not simple, but manageable. You're going to need a vascular consult and probably a few hours in the OR to clean this out properly, Natalie told her. But I'm not dying. Not from this. Good enough, Brianne said. The third operator, a man named Theo Park, had a traumatic head injury that required the most careful and the most restrained hands. Not the kind of case where speed was the primary tool, but the kind where the wrong speed could finish what the injury started. Natalie worked with Dr. Crane on this one, directing more than performing, using language that was precise and stripped of everything that wasn't information. Crane didn't argue. She wasn't sure if he'd decided to trust her, or if he was simply doing what people do when they encounter someone who clearly knows what they're doing, following, because the alternative was standing still while a man's brain bled. Either way, he was useful. By 4:15 a.m., all 3 operators were stabilized. Garrett Lowe was heading to the OR for the chest repair with a cardiothoracic surgeon who'd been called in from home and had arrived with his hair still uneven from sleep. Brianne Calloway was in a bay with IV antibiotics and a vascular team who would see her at first light. Theo Park was in CT, the imaging ticking through its passes. Natalie standing outside the scanner room with her arms crossed and her eyes on the screen. Rourke came to stand beside her. For a while, neither of them said anything. You look the same, he said finally. I'm not. No. A pause. None of us are. She watched the scan images populate, No expanding hemorrhage, no midline shift, the orbital fracture obvious but non-penetrating. Better than she'd feared. Still bad. "Why did you come here?" she asked. "Because you were the closest." "That's not the only reason." He was quiet for a moment. "No, it's not. You could have gone to Brackett Air Force Base. It's 40 minutes further, maybe 50 in this weather. They have a level 1 trauma setup." "I know." "So why come here? Why come to a civilian hospital in the middle of the night with no prior arrangement and 3 critically wounded personnel?" "Because Brackett has a problem right now that I can't talk about in a hallway," he said, "and because your name was in the file my unit keeps, the one we're not supposed to keep." She turned to look at him. His face was the face of a man who had made a difficult decision and was not apologizing for it and was also not entirely certain he'd been right. She recognized that expression. She'd worn it herself. "What file?" she said. "The one that lists every asset our unit has ever worked with that we consider. Call it a continuing resource." "I'm not an asset. I'm a nurse." "Natalie." "I'm a nurse," she said, quietly and precisely, "in a trauma center in Western Oregon, and I have been for 6 years, and whatever I was before that is not who I am now." Rourke looked at her. He had the eyes of a man who had heard that sentence, or sentences like it, many times, from many people, and who had also watched reality refuse to cooperate with it many times, from many people. "The man in Bay 1 is alive because of what you were before that," he said. She didn't answer. "3 of them are," he said. "All 3. She turned back to the scan. Marcus found her at 4:40 a.m. in the break room, standing at the sink with the tap running, not washing her hands, just standing there with the water going over her wrists. He had the careful expression of a man approaching something he didn't fully understand. "You doing okay?" he said. "Fine." "Those were military guys." "Yes. And you—" He stopped. "Natalie, you ran that room like—" "I managed a trauma situation," she said. "It's what we do." "It wasn't how we do it. You knew things. Things you—" He shook his head. "You've always been good. I know you're good. But tonight was different." She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. She looked at Marcus, who had worked beside her for 4 years and brought her terrible coffee and covered her shifts when her back went out last winter, and who was now standing in a break room at 4:40 in the morning, looking at her like she was a person he'd thought he knew and was no longer sure about. "I'll explain what I can when I can," she said. "Right now, I need 10 minutes, and then I need to go back out there." He nodded slowly. "Yeah. Okay." She almost said something else. Instead, she let him go. She sat down in one of the break room chairs, the ones with the cracked vinyl that the hospital had been promising to replace for 2 years, and she looked at the wall, and she breathed. Just breathed. In through the nose, 4 counts. Hold. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. The way she'd learned to do it in a different life, in a different climate, under a sky that had looked nothing like this one. The tattoo on her left arm felt warm under the fabric. It always did when she'd been working that way, at that pitch, with that kind of focus. She didn't know if that was psychosomatic or something else. She'd stopped trying to decide. 6 years ago, she'd driven away from Fort Devereaux in a rental car with 2 duffel bags and a DD-214 that had more blank spaces than a form had any business having. She'd driven west because west was the direction she'd pointed the car, and she hadn't had a better plan. She'd stopped in Carver's Landing, Oregon, because the hospital had been hiring and the apartment had been affordable, and the mountains looked something like the ones in the photograph she carried, and she had needed, with a desperation she still didn't have clean words for, to be ordinary. She had been ordinary. She had been good at being ordinary. She had been a nurse, a genuinely skilled one who gave a damn, one who stayed late and took the difficult patients and didn't flinch at the kinds of things that made new residents pale. And she had kept the tattoo covered and the past where she'd put it. And she had told herself, on the nights when the past felt close, that the woman with the call sign Phantom was someone who no longer existed. Commander Rourke was in her ER. Phantom. Now. She put her face in her hands for a moment. Not long, just a moment. And then she stood up, straightened her scrubs, and walked back out. The helicopter crews were still outside. She could see them through the ER's exterior windows when she passed, two of them smoking under the overhang, the aircraft sitting dark and wet in the ambulance bay with their rotors still. The rain had eased to a drizzle. The parking lot lights gave everything a flat yellow cast. Dr. Crane was waiting near the nurses' station. He had his arms crossed in the expression of a man who had made a decision and wasn't happy about it but had made it anyway. "We need to talk," he said. "Good morning to you too, Elliot." "Don't." His voice wasn't loud, but it had an edge. "Don't do that thing where you deflect. I've watched you do it for 6 years, and tonight I'm not in the mood." She stopped. What you did in there," he said. "Needle decompression under pressure, tourniquet management. That's not nursing school. That's not trauma center training. I've seen paramedics freeze doing what you did tonight, and I've seen ER docs fumble it, and you did it like it was automatic." "I've had a lot of practice," she said. "Where?" She looked at him. "Where, Natalie?" He leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, Shah. Actually, something closer to the way a person looks when they're asking a real question and are not sure they want the real answer. "Because I've been treating you like a competent nurse for 6 years, and I don't know what I was actually looking at." "You were looking at a nurse," she said. "That's what I am here." "And somewhere else?" She didn't answer. He watched her face for a moment, and whatever he was looking for, he either found it or stopped expecting to find it, because he exhaled and uncrossed his arms and looked at the floor. "The SEAL who was on that first stretcher, Garrett, he's going to make it?" "I think so. Assuming the OR goes the way it should. The chest repair's straightforward enough. Cardio's good." "I know." A pause. "The young woman, Calloway. Vascular team in the morning. She'll keep both legs." "Yeah." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Okay." He looked up. "I owe you an apology." She blinked. "I know how I've talked about you," he said. "To residents, to staff. I know the reputation I built for you around here without actually—" He stopped. "You've been managing things in this ER for 6 years that I wasn't seeing clearly. That's on me." Natalie looked at him for a long moment. Elliot Crane was not a humble man. What he was doing right now cost him something, and they both knew it, and she wasn't going to make it smaller. "Apology accepted," she said. He nodded once. "I'm going to check on Park's CT results. I'll be there in a minute." He left. She stood at the nurse's station and looked at her hands. They were still. They were always still now. She'd worked very hard for that, in the years since Fort Devereaux, the way you work hard at something that used to be natural and became frightening and had to be made natural again from a different direction. She heard footsteps and looked up. Rourke was walking toward her with a tablet in his hand, and behind him, 2 other men she didn't recognize, but whose bearing she recognized, the kind of upright, specifically alert posture you didn't get from a gym, you got from years of knowing that inattention had consequences. One of them was in civilian clothes that didn't quite fit his frame the way civilian clothes were supposed to. "I need to show you something," Rourke said. "Commander, whatever you need to show me It can't wait," he said, simply, without pressure. "It genuinely can't wait." She looked at him. She looked at the tablet he was holding. The screen was turned toward her. On it was a photograph, a personnel file. Her photograph, but not the one HR had on record. Younger, harder around the eyes, in a uniform she hadn't worn in 6 years, against a background that told anyone who knew what they were looking at exactly where and when that photograph had been taken. Beneath the photograph, in red text that she recognized as a classification notation, were the words, "Status, active. Reinstatement, pending authorization." She went very still. "What is that?" she said, and it wasn't a question. "That," Rourke said quietly, "is why I'm here." The overhead lights in the ER hummed. Somewhere in the building, a monitor beeped steadily. Outside, one of the helicopter crews laughed at something. The sound carried faint and strange through the wet night air. Natalie Voss looked at the file with her name on it. Her real name, the one she'd stopped using. The one attached to things she'd done in places she didn't talk about. And she felt the floor of the ordinary life she had built for herself begin, very quietly, to shift. She didn't move for a long moment, just looked at the screen. Rourke didn't rush her. The ER hummed around them, carts rolling, a monitor ticking somewhere in Bay 6, the distant percussion of the still idling ground crew outside shuffling gear. Normal sounds, the sounds of the life she'd built. She was aware of all of them in the specific way she became aware of background noise when her body was deciding whether something was a threat. "Who authorized this file?" she said. "It came from JAG," Rourke said, "through JSOC, time-stamped 11 days ago." "I've been out for 6 years." "I know. There's a process. There are regulations. You can't just flag someone as active reinstatement pending without a waiver from the Deputy Director of Special Operations Command." He paused. "Which is what happened." She looked up from the tablet. "Who requested the waiver?" she said. He held her gaze. "I did." The two men behind him didn't move, didn't look away. Professional stillness, the kind that wasn't passive but had nowhere obvious to go. She recognized the type. She'd worked alongside that type. She'd been that type, in a life that was now looking at her through a tablet screen in the middle of a rainy Oregon night. "You want to explain to me," she said, keeping her voice even, "why you went to the deputy director before you came to me?" "Because I needed authority before I could ask you anything. You know how this works, Natalie." "I know how it worked," she said, past tense, deliberately past tense. "The mission that went wrong tonight," he stopped. He looked around the ER, a quick professional scan, then back at her. "This isn't the place." "Then you should have called me. You should have reached out through, I don't know, a back channel, a mutual contact, something. Instead of landing 2 aircraft in my ambulance bay at 3 in the morning with 3 bleeding men. If I'd called you, you'd have said no." She opened her mouth, closed it, because he was right and she wasn't going to insult either of them by pretending he wasn't. "There's a conference room down the hall," she said finally. "Give me 10 minutes to check on Park's CT, then you're going to tell me everything." Well, the CT on Theo Park showed what she'd hoped and feared in roughly equal measure. No expanding hemorrhage, no midline shift, but a hairline fracture at the left temporal bone that was close enough to the middle meningeal artery to make her want to keep him overnight under neuro-obs regardless of how good his neurochecks looked. She relayed her recommendations to the neurology resident on call, a man named Piotr, who had the phone manner of someone who'd been woken up too many times in one career and had stopped being apologetic about it. And then she walked down the hall to the conference room. Rourke was there. One of the 2 men had stayed, the one in the civilian clothes that didn't fit right. He introduced himself as Harlan, no last name. She didn't ask. She sat across from them and waited. Rourke put his hands on the table. He had a scar across the knuckles of his right hand that was new. Newer than 6 years ago, anyway. He noticed her noticing it and didn't comment. 11 days ago, he said, a joint operation went sideways in a location I can't name in this room. The op involved 3 units, one of which was mine. The objective was the extraction of a high-value asset who had intelligence on a weapons pipeline. Specific, actionable intelligence that we had about 60 hours to act on before it went cold or got moved. What went wrong? The extract site was compromised before we reached it. Someone inside the logistics chain fed the location. We had 6 operators in and 3 came out. The 3 you saw tonight. She was quiet for a moment. And the other 3? 2 confirmed KIA. 1, he looked at Harlan. Something passed between them. 1 is still unaccounted for. She felt the specific cold weight of that. Unaccounted for in the language they both spoke meant something more complicated than it sounded, and never something good. The weapons pipeline, she said. It moved? Part of it. The other part, Rourke sat back. That's the part I can't talk about in a conference room in a civilian hospital, but it's the reason I needed to find you, not just as a medic. She looked at him. Say what you mean, Commander. The asset we were trying to extract, he said. She asked for you specifically. Before the extract site went hot, we got a partial transmission. Her words, not ours. Find Phantom. The room was quiet enough that she could hear the rain against the conference room's single window. Who is the asset? Natalie said. Rourke reached into a folder she hadn't seen him carry in and slid a photograph across the table. She didn't touch it. She looked at it from where she sat. A woman, mid-40s. Dark hair pulled back, a face she recognized in the way you recognize a face from a dream, not clearly, not comfortably, but unmistakably. Her name, Rourke said, is Dr. Mara Solis. Natalie picked up the photograph. Mara Solis had been the lead trauma surgeon for a forward operating medical unit during Natalie's second deployment. She had worked alongside Natalie in conditions that had no business producing the surgical outcomes they produced. She had also, at some point in the 3 years following Natalie's discharge, apparently transitioned into intelligence work in a capacity that Rourke was being careful not to define too precisely. I haven't spoken to her since Devereaux, Natalie said. I know. Why me? If she's been working in that world for 3 years, she has contacts, she has handlers. Why ask for... Because of what she found, Harlan said. It was the first time he'd spoken. His voice was quieter than his size suggested and more careful. Before the extract site went hot, she transmitted a data package. Partial. Encrypted. The decryption key she sent with it was a sequence that our analysts couldn't break for 9 days. But they broke it. They broke it 2 days ago. The key itself was a reference, a specific operation, a specific date, a code phrase. He looked at her steadily. The phrase was Phantom's Reach. She set the photograph down. Phantom's Reach had been the operational code for a 3-day mission in a country she no longer named, during a winter that she could still feel in her left shoulder when the weather dropped below 40. It had been a joint operation between her unit and a field surgical team. She had been the only combat medic present at a specific decision point that had determined whether 6 people lived or died. All 6 had lived. The only people who knew the operational details of that mission, who knew that code phrase in that sequence, were the people who had been there. And the people who had been there were a very short list. What was in the data package? She said. Rourke and Harlan exchanged another look. Names, Rourke said. Personnel files. 14 people, across 4 branches of service and 2 intelligence agencies, who Solis had evidence were involved in directing compromised information to opposition networks over a period of approximately 18 months. Natalie was quiet. Including, Rourke said carefully, 2 names at the command level of the organization responsible for your discharge. She was still quiet. The rain ticked against the window. She thought about a rental car pointed west on a January morning, about a DD-214 with blank spaces, about 6 years of long sleeves in July. You're saying my discharge was compromised, she said. I'm saying we have 14 names and 2 of them had authority over the personnel decisions that ended your career. He paused, and Mara Solis believed you were the person who would understand what that meant and not do anything stupid with it before we could secure the full package. Where is she now? Unknown. The extract failed. She went dark. Her last confirmed position was... He stopped. Her last confirmed position was a communications relay point 70 miles from the border. That was 9 days ago. Natalie stood up. She went to the window and looked at the parking lot, at the Blackhawk sitting in the yellow light, at the rain coming down soft and steady now. Mara Solis had called for her, from somewhere that sounded like the inside of a disaster, with a data package that could apparently unravel something that had been doing damage for 18 months. She had reached back and pointed at a woman in blue scrubs who'd been trying very hard to be ordinary. Find Phantom. What do you need from me? Natalie said. Right now? Nothing you haven't already given us. The operators needed to survive the night. They have. Rourke stood. But there's going to be a debrief at 0800. JAG will be present. The deputy director's office will be on a secure line. And they're going to want to talk to you about the Solis transmission. I'm not military. You're on the reinstatement file. That I didn't authorize. No, he said. But the information in that package names people who hurt you, Natalie. People who ended your career under false pretenses and covered the trail afterward. You have a stake in this whether you authorize it or not. She didn't turn from the window. Oh, 800, she said. Secured conference line. I'll have the details to you by 6. I work until 7. I know. She heard him stand, heard the small sounds of someone collecting things from a table. She kept looking at the parking lot. Natalie. His voice was quieter now, not official. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it took this to find you. I should have. He stopped. I should have made more noise 6 years ago about how your discharge happened. She didn't say anything for a long moment. You're saying that now, she said. Yeah. A pause. I am. She heard the conference room door open. Then Rourke's voice, one more time, from the doorway. The young operator, Garrett. He going to be okay? Ask me at 0800, she said. The door closed. She went back to work. That was the thing about a trauma center at 5 in the morning. It didn't pause for personal revelations. There was a 68-year-old woman in Bay 2 with chest pain that needed to be ruled cardiac before anyone relaxed. There was a man with a scalp laceration who'd been waiting 90 minutes and had shifted from annoyed to dramatically aggrieved. There was a 2-year-old with a fever of 104 that her parents had been managing at home since midnight and had finally, at the urging of what sounded like a very sensible grandmother, brought in. Natalie did all of it. Chest pain, troponin levels, EKG, the careful conversation with a woman named Adele who had sharp eyes and was clearly terrified beneath the practicality. Scalp laceration, irrigation, closure, the discharge instructions delivered to a man who was still aggrieved but had downgraded to medium aggrieved after she'd been brisk and competent and hadn't apologized for his weight in a way that invited more complaint. The 2-year-old, fluids, fever reducer, the specific steady calm of talking to parents who were running on fear and no sleep, telling them what she knew and what she was watching for and what would happen next. Between cases, she thought about 14 names. She thought about blank spaces on a DD-214. She thought about Mara Solis somewhere 70 miles from a border that Rourke hadn't named, transmitting a data package with an encryption key that pointed at a dead call sign. At 6:15, Marcus appeared beside her again. He handed her a coffee. Not terrible this time. The military guys, he said, the ones who are still here. The woman, Calloway, she asked about you. What did she ask? She asked if you were okay. He paused. I didn't know what to tell her. Tell her I'm fine. Are you? She drank the coffee. I'm always fine, Marcus. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have. He leaned against the counter. He was a big man, 6'2", broad, the kind of person who seemed to take up exactly the right amount of space in a room. And he had the quality, which she'd valued from their first shift together, of knowing when to press and when to wait. Right now, he was waiting. I have a meeting at 800, she said. Military. It's complicated. I can't tell you more than that yet. Yet, he said. Yet. He nodded slowly. You want me to cover the tail end of your shift? I want you to pretend everything is normal until I know more. I'm very good at pretending everything is normal, he said. It's basically my primary skill. Despite everything, that got a small sound out of her that was almost a laugh. At 6:40, she went to check on Garrett Lowe. He was out of the OR and in recovery. The cardiothoracic surgeon had called it clean, the chest repair had gone the way it was supposed to go, and Garrett was in the specific deep sleep of someone whose body had been through a serious insult and was now performing the unglamorous work of beginning to recover. His color was better, his oxygen saturation was good. The chest tube was draining the way chest tubes were supposed to drain. She stood at the foot of his bed for a moment and looked at him. 27. Big shoulders. Someone had put a thin blanket over him that wasn't quite long enough to cover his feet, and that small detail caught at her for a moment in a way she couldn't entirely explain. She adjusted the blanket. Uselessly. Automatically. Something she'd done in worse places than this. Nurse Voss. She turned. Brianne Calloway was in the next bay, separated by a curtain that was 3/4 drawn. She was awake. She didn't look like someone who'd slept, and she had the alert, slightly sunken look of a person running on painkillers and discipline. Staff Sergeant, Natalie said. Brianne's fine. She nodded toward Garrett. How is he? Surgery went well. He'll recover. Really? Or are you telling me that because it's what I need to hear? Natalie looked at her directly. Really, The lung repair was clean. He's young, and his baseline was good before this. He'll have a complicated few weeks, but he's going to recover. Brienne exhaled. It was a controlled exhale, the kind that cost something. Thank you, she said, for what you did earlier. In the trauma bay. She paused. I've been in the field for 8 years. I've worked with a lot of medics. Some of them good, some of them great. Another pause. I've never seen anyone work like that. Not in a field environment and definitely not in a hospital. Natalie was quiet for a moment. How's the leg? She said. Hurts like hell, but it works. Vascular team confirmed. A small, tight smile. I'll take it. You will. Natalie moved to check Brienne's chart on the wall-mounted display, scanning the overnight notes, the vital signs, the vascular team's notation. Everything was tracking. Vascular surgeon wants to see you at 8. They'll discuss the clean-out surgery then. Going to be a fun morning. You'll manage. She moved a step away. Boss. Brienne's voice was quiet. Rourke told us about you, before the mission. Not details, just that if things went sideways, there was someone who would know what to do. Natalie stopped. He said your unit name, Phantom. Brienne watched her carefully. He said if we ever wound up in your hands, we should feel lucky. The word sat there. Natalie had spent 6 years working very hard at not being lucky in that particular way, at not being the kind of person who inspired that kind of remark, at being ordinary and consistent and good at a job that was meaningfully good without being the kind of good that required a classified file and a blank space discharge and long sleeves in July. Get some sleep if you can, Natalie said. The vascular team doesn't care if you're tired. She walked back to the nurse's station. The sky outside the ER windows had shifted. Not quite light, but that pre-dawn state where the dark becomes less certain, where the shapes in the parking lot become specific. One of the helicopter crews was eating something from a paper bag near the ground. Ordinary things, happening in strange proximity to everything else. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unfamiliar number, a contact string she recognized as a secure line prefix. The message was 4 words. Package decoded. All 14. She stared at the screen. All 14 meant the full data package had been decrypted. It meant they weren't working from a partial anymore. It meant 14 names, fully documented, fully evidenced, across 4 branches and 2 agencies. It meant the 2 names at the command level who'd had authority over her discharge weren't shadows or suspicions anymore. It also meant something else. The package was fully decoded. The people named in it would have reason to know. And if they had the resources Natalie suspected people in those positions would have, they would be moving right now to do whatever people in compromised positions do when they realize the evidence against them has just become complete. She thought about Mara Solis, 70 miles from a border, dark for 9 days. She thought about the fact that a fully decoded package was leverage, and that leverage had a countermove, and the countermove was eliminating the source. She moved to the nurse's station phone. Rourke's contact number was on the information sheet he'd left with her. She dialed. It rang twice. Yeah, he answered. I got the text about the package, she said. All 14. We just got confirmation. The analysts, Rourke, Solis. She kept her voice even and quiet. If the package is decoded, does whoever is named in it know that? A pause on the line, longer than she liked. That's something we're currently assessing, he said. That's not an answer. Natalie. If they know, she said, and she's still out there, if they have any remaining asset in that region, they are not going to wait. You know that. I know that. The pause this time was shorter. We have a team in position. Do you trust that team? Another pause. The command chain for the team is clean. We verified. How high up? Silence. She had her answer. Commander, she said, and her voice had gone very quiet and very flat in a way that had nothing to do with calm. If there are compromised personnel at command level and your recovery team for Solis is operating under a command chain you can't fully verify, you may be sending people to find her who have a reason to not find her, or to find her and report something different. I'm aware of that possibility, he said, and his voice had changed too, tighter, more compressed. What's the alternative? That's what 0800 is going to be about. What time is it now? 6:52. I'll be there at 7:30, she said. I want the full package, everything that was decoded, all 14 names. That's classified above your current commander. She paused. You put my name on a reinstatement file without asking me. You landed in my parking lot in the middle of the night. You told me that people who ended my career with paperwork full of blank spaces are in that package. She paused again. I want to see the names. He was quiet for 3 seconds. 7:30, he said. She hung up. She set the phone down on the nurse's station counter. Marcus was at the far end of the station, close enough to see that she'd made a call, far enough to have heard none of it. He raised his eyebrows. I need you to hold things until 7, she said. I have somewhere to be. At 7 in the morning. At 7:30. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating a model that had been mostly correct and had just been shown a significant data point that didn't fit it. Okay, he said. Go. She nodded. She was already moving. She went to her locker. She took out her jacket, not the thin one she usually wore for the walk to the parking garage, but the heavier one she kept in the back, the one she'd packed the day she left Fort Devereaux and never unpacked from her bag until she'd needed a coat in a new city. She put it on. She pushed up the left sleeve. The tattoo was there the way it was always there, the marks, the sigil, the name in small lettering. She looked at it for a moment in a way she hadn't looked at it in a while, not ignoring it, not covering it, just looking. She rolled the sleeve back down. She was almost to the exit when the main ER door slid open and 2 men walked in. Not military, no tactical gear, no weapons at visible ready, suits. Federal issue, the kind of anonymous professional clothing that telegraphed a specific institutional origin to anyone who'd spent time in rooms where people wore it. They were moving with a purpose that wasn't about medical care. Behind her, she heard Marcus say, "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The taller of the two looked past Marcus, looked at her. "Natalie Voss," he said. She turned fully to face them. "We're with the Office of Personnel Security," the tall one said. He held up a credential. She clocked it. Federal. Legitimately formatted. "We have some questions about a data package that was transmitted 11 days ago from an unregistered communications relay. We believe you may have information relevant to our investigation." He was not smiling. His partner was closer to the exit than would have made sense if they were just 2 people with questions. Natalie looked at the credentials again. Then she looked at the 2 men, at their posture, at the way the shorter one had positioned himself relative to the room. She thought about 14 names. She thought about command-level authority and blank spaces on paperwork. She thought about the fact that it was 6:58 in the morning and she had a meeting at 7:30 with Commander Rourke and a JAG officer and a secure line to the deputy director's office. And that someone, somewhere, knew that and had sent these 2 men to reach her first. "Sure," she said pleasantly. "Why don't you show me those credentials again?" She held out her hand. The taller one, the one who'd spoken, passed the credential case across. She took it, turned it over, looked at the badge and the photo ID with the careful, unhurried attention of someone who was not impressed by laminate. Federal Personnel Security. The badge number was in the right format. The seal was correct. The photo matched the face in front of her well enough. She handed it back. "You said a data package," she said. "What kind of data package?" "We're not able to discuss specifics here," the tall one said. His name on the credential had been Ferris. "We'd like you to come with us for a voluntary interview." "Voluntary?" "That's correct." She looked at the exit, where his partner was standing in the specific posture of someone trying to look casual about blocking an exit. She looked at Ferris. She looked at the clock on the wall behind the nurse's station, 6:59. "I have a scheduled meeting at 7:30, she said, "with military personnel and a JAG officer. If your interview is voluntary, I'd prefer to do it after that." Something moved across Ferris's face that he controlled quickly. "We'd prefer to speak with you before that meeting." "I imagine you would," she said. Marcus was behind her, still and alert in the way that large, perceptive people get still and alert when a room changes. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Ferris. "Ms. Voss?" Ferris took a small step forward. Not aggressive, calibrated. "This is a straightforward matter of Agent Ferris." She kept her voice even and almost pleasant. I'm going to make a phone call. If your office is expecting you to bring me in before 7:30, they'll confirm that to whoever I'm calling, and if they confirm it, I'll come with you without any further discussion." She paused. "Is that agreeable?" A beat. Too long. "Of course," Ferris said. She took out her phone. She dialed Rourke's number, turned slightly away from the two men, and waited. It rang once. "Voss?" "Two men just walked into my ER. Federal Personnel Security. They want a voluntary interview before our 7:30. 1 second of silence. Then, "Don't go with them." "Where are they standing?" "Main entrance, one near the doors." "I'm 2 minutes out. Do not leave that building." She hung up. She turned back to Ferris. "My contact is on his way. He'll be here shortly. We can sort out the scheduling question when he arrives." She smiled at him, the specific professional smile she used on patients who were being difficult in a way she understood but was not going to accommodate. "Can I get you gentlemen anything while you wait? We have coffee, but I have to be honest with you. It's not great." Ferris looked at her for a long moment. He was recalculating something. She could see it. The small tension around the jaw, the slightly too controlled blink. He hadn't expected this. "We'll wait," he said. Rourke came through the ER doors at 7:03 with Harlan and two others she hadn't seen before. One in uniform, one in the same category of suit as Ferris and his partner, but with a different, sharper quality to the way he moved. The suited one had a leather portfolio under his arm, and the expression of someone who charged by the hour and had been billing since before sunrise. The next 4 minutes were the kind of 4 minutes that happen in corridors and waiting rooms and low-voiced corners of buildings when institutional interests collided, and everyone involved was being very professional about the fact that they were in a confrontation. She stood slightly apart and watched it. Rourke and Ferris talked. The man with the portfolio spoke once, quietly, and Ferris's partner took a half-step backward that he probably didn't realize he'd taken. She caught fragments. Authorization, jurisdictional, JSOC, directive. Pending review. Ferris looked at her once during the conversation. She looked back. Eventually, Ferris took out his own phone and made a call that lasted 90 seconds. When he hung up, something in his posture had changed, not defeated, but recalibrated toward a different strategy. "We'll be in contact," he told Rourke. He didn't look at her again. He and his partner walked out. Rourke came to her. "Who sent them?" she said. "Working on that?" He didn't look satisfied. The credential was legitimate. OPS is a real office. But the request for a voluntary interview wasn't logged through standard channels. Someone used a legitimate institutional framework to move outside of it. Someone who knew I had a 7:30 meeting. Yes. And knew what the meeting was about. Yes. He paused, which narrows the field considerably. She watched the glass doors where Ferris and his partner had gone. "They're not going to stop," she said. "No, they're not." "Then we need to move faster than they are." The secure conference line was established in a back room the hospital used for administration meetings. Beige walls, a table that had seen better decades, a telephone console that Harlan's colleague had attached a scrambler unit to with the efficient matter-of-factness of a person who'd done it many times. The man with the portfolio turned out to be a JAG colonel named Trask. He had the legal officer quality of conveying a great deal through what he chose not to say, and she decided within 4 minutes of meeting him that she respected him. The deputy director's office came on the line at 7:38, a woman's voice, controlled and precise, who introduced herself as Deputy Director Callahan and then moved immediately to business. Natalie sat across from Rourke with a printed copy of the decoded package in front of her. 14 pages, 14 names. She'd read it once in the 6 minutes before the call connected and was on her second pass, moving slower, picking out the architecture of what Mara Solis had spent. She didn't know how long, building. The evidence was meticulous, not rushed, not improvised. The kind of documentation that required sustained access and a very specific kind of patience. Financial transfers, communication logs, operational timelines that cross-referenced with known mission compromises. The picture that emerged was of a network that had been functioning for at least 22 months, feeding intelligence to a specific opposition procurement channel in exchange for what the documents described carefully, in Solis's precise clinical prose, as substantial material consideration. 2 of the 14 names were men Natalie knew: Brigadier General Lewis Hart, Deputy Operations Chief, Special Personnel Division, Fort Devereaux; Colonel Wendell Price, Head of Personnel Review, same command. She had sat across a table from both of them on a Tuesday in January 6 years ago, while they'd explained to her with great institutional regret that her continued service was incompatible with the requirements of her unit and that her discharge would be processed under a provision that was technically legitimate and practically unanswerable. She'd asked questions. The answers had been careful and complete and had told her nothing true. She'd driven west the next morning. "Miss Voss." Deputy Director Callahan's voice through the console was clear and level. "You're looking at the package." "Yes." "What's your read?" Natalie considered the question. It wasn't a perfunctory one. Callahan actually wanted to know what she saw in it, which told her something about how the deputy director was approaching this. "Solis built this over time," Natalie said. "This isn't surveillance from outside. She was inside something, inside their access, their communications, long enough to document 22 months of activity. She didn't stumble onto this. She went looking." She paused. "Which means she suspected before she could prove. Which means she had a reason to suspect." She looked at Rourke. "Who recruited her for intelligence work? After her surgical unit?" Rourke's jaw shifted slightly. "She was approached by an independent analysis office with connections to 3 agencies. Low-profile placement. She was never formally affiliated with JSOC or any unit I worked with. But she knew to use Phantom's reach as the key." "Yes." "So she knew my history at some point. Someone told her. Or she found it." "That's something we haven't fully resolved," Trask said from the end of the table. "You need to resolve it," Natalie said, "because if she knew enough about me to use that code phrase, she either has a source who's clean or she has a source who's compromised. And which one it is matters a great deal for what you do next." Callahan spoke. "We're treating her source as unknown reliability until further evidence. Right now, the primary concern is Solis's location, 9 days without contact in a region with active opposition presence." "She might not be alive," Natalie said. She said it flat because it needed to be said flat and not softened. "That's a possibility we're preparing for," Callahan said. "It's not the scenario we're operating from yet. The package she transmitted was incomplete. There are 3 additional files referenced in the index that weren't included in the transmission." "She kept something back," Natalie said. "It appears so." "Which means she anticipated the transmission might be intercepted. She sent enough to be credible and kept enough to be necessary." Natalie set the pages down. "She's alive. She made herself necessary." A pause on the line. Then Callahan said almost quietly, "That's what we think too." "So where is she?" Rourke leaned forward. "There's a secondary relay point, not the one she was confirmed at 9 days ago, but one she established independently, off protocol. We found reference to it in the decoded headers of the package. It's not a place we'd have known to look without the decode." "How far?" "From her last confirmed position, on foot under adverse conditions?" He paused. "Possible, if she moved within 48 hours of going dark." "And if she didn't?" He didn't answer that. "I want to see the relay point coordinates," Natalie said. "You're not, Trask started. "I know what I am and what I'm not, Colonel. I want to see the coordinates because I want to understand the geography. She and I spent time in that region during our second deployment. I know the terrain." She looked at him steadily. "And because right now, I'm the only person in this room who she specifically requested. If she's there, and if she needs convincing to trust whoever comes through the door, that matters." Trask looked at Rourke. Rourke looked at the console. "Deputy Director," Rourke said. Callahan was quiet for 4 seconds. "Show her the coordinates." She looked at the map for a long time. The secondary relay point was a structure. The satellite imagery showed something that had been a farm outbuilding, now derelict, in a river valley corridor she recognized from a different winter. She and Mara Solis had passed through that valley on the 3rd day of Phantom's reach. It had been cold enough to feel the air in your back teeth, Mara had complained about her bootlaces the entire time, kept breaking. She'd borrowed duct tape from Natalie's kit and wrapped them, and they'd held for 2 days and then broken again, and she'd said something profane and specific that Natalie could still hear clearly if she let herself. She handed the map back. She'd go there, she said. If she needed ground she trusted. You're certain? No, but it fits. Rourke nodded slowly. He pulled the map toward him, looked at it, then at Harlan. Some kind of calculation was happening between them that had been happening since before this meeting, probably. There's a team, Rourke said. Clean command chain. I've personally verified 2 levels up. We can have them in position within 6 hours if we move now. 6 hours, Natalie said. And Hart and Price have their names in a decoded package that JAG is now holding. They don't know JAG has it. They know the package was decoded. The text I received at 6:52. How many people knew that? Silence around the table. Someone sent Ferris and his partner at 6:59, she said. 7 minutes. That's not coincidence, that's monitoring. Someone in your communications chain flagged the decode notification and moved immediately. She looked at Rourke. Which means they're already trying to contain this. And Solis is the one thing that can't be contained by paperwork. The implications settled over the room. Trask said very carefully, Ms. Voss, what you're suggesting I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a timeline. She was aware of how her voice sounded. Quiet, without inflection. The specific register she'd learned to use when emotion was present, but needed to not be visible. 7 minutes between the decode notification and 2 federal officers walking into my ER. If that same speed applies to Mara Solis's location, and if that location is now findable through the decoded headers, then 6 hours might be too long. The room was quiet. Rourke's jaw was doing the thing it did when he was running numbers he didn't like. How fast can your team move? Natalie said. If I authorize a priority extract, 3 hours. Maybe less if the weather holds. Authorize it. I don't need your... Rourke. She stopped. She looked at him across the table, and something in her face was different now from the way it had been at the nurse's station and in the break room and at the window at 5 in the morning. Something had settled. Settled the way things settle when you stop arguing with them. Authorize it, and I want to be on a communications line when they reach the relay point. You're a civilian. You put my name on a reinstatement file. That doesn't mean, then take my name off it and do this without me. She spread her hands on the table. Take my name off the file. Send your team without a communications link to the one person Solis asked for, and hope the package is enough on its own, with 3 files missing, to prosecute 14 people, including 2 general officers who have been inside that command structure for over 20 years and know every procedural defense available to them. Trask was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Callahan's voice came through the console. Commander Rourke, authorize the priority extract. Rourke exhaled through his nose. Authorized. And Ms. Voss, Callahan continued, you'll have your communications link. Trask will coordinate. A pause. I've reviewed your service record, the portions that aren't blank. You were exceptional. I was doing my job, Natalie said. Yes, Callahan said. You were. And so were the people who covered that record with blanks, doing their job, which was protecting themselves. Her voice was as controlled as before, but something in it had sharpened. That ends today. At 9:14 a.m., Natalie was still in the hospital. She'd handed off the remainder of her shift to the incoming day team. A brief professional exchange, nothing explained. Marcus watching her with the particular expression of a man who understood that something significant was happening and had made his peace with not knowing what. She'd changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, standing in front of her open locker with the jacket on the hook and the photograph of the mountain range where it always was. She took the photograph, put it in her jacket pocket. She didn't examine why. Harlan had set up a field communications station in the administration room. Compact, efficient, the kind of kit that folded into 2 cases and could run off a generator if the building power failed. She sat at the table and listened to the team's movement on the open channel. Rourke was in the room, standing against the wall with his arms crossed, watching the speaker as if watching it closely enough would make it say the right things. At 9:41, the team leader's voice came through. Approaching secondary relay, 200 meters. Natalie leaned forward. Structures appear intact. No movement visible at perimeter. Copy, Harlan said into the channel. Approach with caution. Establish visual before entry. 1 minute of nothing but the ambient sound of transmission. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she usually wasn't. Rourke hadn't moved. Visual on door, the team leader said. It's been opened recently. Ground disturbed. Copy. A pause. We have an occupant. 1 person. Condition. A fractional hesitation. Condition is bad. Requesting immediate medical assessment on channel. Natalie was already reaching for the secondary handset Harlan had set up for her. This is Voss. I'm on channel. What are you seeing? Female, 40s, appears semi-conscious, visible lacerations on the face and left arm, probable dehydration, possible fever. She's talking. What is she saying? A pause. Background noise. Then the team leader again, and this time his voice was different, quieter, with the particular uncertainty of someone relaying something they're not sure they heard correctly. She's saying a name, he said. She keeps saying the same name. Natalie went still. What name, she said. Another pause. Shorter. Phantoms, the team leader said. She's asking for Phantom. And in the administration room of Harborview Crest Medical Center, with the morning light coming hard and flat through the single window and Rourke motionless against the wall, Natalie Voss closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. Get her stable, she said into the handset. I need her core temp, respiratory rate, and level of consciousness on a scale of Voss. Rourke's voice from the wall, quiet and not quite steady. She looked up. He was holding his phone. The expression on his face was the one she associated with people receiving information that changed the parameters of a situation they had thought they understood. What? She said. Hart, he said. Lewis Hart. The JAG hold on his file was just... He stopped. Someone pulled it. 3 minutes ago. His file, Price's file, and the full personnel record associated with your discharge. Pulled them where? I don't know yet. Who authorized the pull? That's what I don't know, he said. But whoever it was, they had sufficient clearance to do it without a counter-signature. She looked at him. He looked at her. They're not trying to hide anymore, she said. No. They're moving to destroy the record. Yes. She looked at the handset in her hand, at the speaker where the team's voice was still coming through. Medical details, Mara's vital signs, the reassuring procedural sounds of people doing their jobs under pressure. She looked at the clock on the wall. She thought about 14 names in blank spaces and the rental car she'd driven west in 6 years ago, about every long sleeve in every July, about Garrett Lowe's feet not covered by the blanket, about a woman in a derelict farm building at the edge of a valley she'd walked through in the cold, asking for a name she shouldn't have known. She thought about what it means when the people destroying evidence stop being careful. Rourke, she said, we need to move everything, now. Not in an hour, not when the team extracts Solis. Now. Every file, every communication log, every decoded fragment. Get it to Callahan directly. Not through the chain, directly. If I go outside the chain if you stay inside the chain, she said, someone in it just demonstrated they can pull classified personnel records without a counter-signature at 9:44 in the morning, and nobody stopped them. She stood. How long until that's Mara's extraction file? The handset on the table crackled. The team leader's voice, we have her. She's ambulatory, barely. She's asking if Phantom is on the line. Rourke and Natalie looked at each other across the table. She picked up the handset. Mara, she said, I'm here. 3 seconds of static. Then a voice. Thin, hoarse, with the specific ragged quality of a person who had been holding something together by force of will for a very long time and was only just now considering that they might be allowed to stop. Nat, a breath. There's a 15th name. It's not in the package. Another breath. I didn't transmit it because I wasn't sure. A pause so long she thought the connection had dropped. I'm sure now. Natalie's hand tightened on the handset. Tell me, she said. and Mara Solis said a name that made the room go so quiet that Natalie could hear her own pulse, clear and steady and counting. The name was Deputy Director Alan Mercer. Natalie didn't move, didn't speak. The handset was in her hand, and Mara's breathing was coming through the line in shallow, effortful increments, and the name sat in the middle of the administration room like something that had fallen from a height and was still settling. Rourke had heard it. She could tell by the way he'd gone absolutely still against the wall, not the stillness of a man who didn't know what he was hearing, but the stillness of a man who did. Harlan's hand had stopped moving on the keyboard. "Mara," Natalie said carefully. "Say it again." "Mercer." The voice on the line was thin but precise. Whatever was wrong with Mara's body, her mind was working. "Alan Mercer. He's not in the package because I couldn't find the financial trail. It was cleaner than the others. Routed through 3 separate cutouts, 2 of them overseas. I needed time I didn't have." A breath. "But the communication logs, the originating authorization on 4 of the compromised operations, it traces back to his office. Not to him by name, to his office." "That's circumstantial," Natalie said. "I know. That's why I didn't transmit it." A pause, and then a sound that might have been pain controlled very quickly. "But the 3 files I held back, 2 of them closed the financial trail. If your analysts have what I sent them, and they pull the supplementary files I'm transmitting now, it closes." "She's transmitting," Harlan said quietly, watching his screen. "Mara, stay on the line," Natalie said. "The team is with you. Let them work." "I'm not going anywhere." A fractional pause. "I've been in this building for 6 days." 6 days? Natalie filed that. The timeline, the specific math of sitting alone in a derelict structure with limited supplies. She filed it and set it aside for when there was room to think about what it cost. "The team is getting you out," she said. "Cooperate with their medical assessment. Don't argue about whatever's wrong with your ankle." A sound that was almost a laugh. "I'll try." "Mara." "Yeah." "The 15th name, you're certain?" Not a question. "I'm certain," Mara said. "I've been certain for 3 days. That's why I couldn't sleep." Rourke moved away from the wall. He crossed to the table, put both hands on it, and looked at Harlan. "Get Callahan back on the line, not through the standard relay. Direct to her office. Whatever number you have for direct contact, use it." "That'll flag," Harlan said. "It'll flag anyway. Do it." Harlan was already dialing. Natalie set the handset down. The team leader's voice continued from the speaker. Methodical, professional, the sounds of a medical assessment being conducted under field conditions. And she let it run in the background while she picked up the printed package from the table. She turned to the section on Alan Mercer. He wasn't in the package. She'd read the pages twice and his name appeared nowhere. But she knew his name. Everyone in the room knew his name because Alan Mercer had been Deputy Director of Special Operations Intelligence for 4 years, and before that had run the Special Personnel Division for 6, and before that had been the kind of rising institutional star whose name appeared in briefings as shorthand for the direction things were going. He had also, she now understood, been in that position when her discharge was processed. He had been Hart and Price's superior. She thought about the phone call at 6:59, 7 minutes from the decode notification to Ferris walking through her ER doors. She thought about personnel files being pulled without countersignature at 9:44. She thought about the specific kind of access those actions required and where in the chain that access lived. "It was him running the countermove this morning," she said. Rourke looked at her. "Say it clearly." "Ferris and his partner, the personnel file pulls. Both of those required authorization from above Hart and Price's level. They were named in the package. They'd be flagged if they tried to access anything this morning. Someone above them moved." She set the pages down. "Mercer has been managing the containment since the decode notification. He's the one who sent the men this morning. I know it's not proven. I'm not in a courtroom." She looked at him. "But you know I'm right." He didn't argue. Callahan came on the line at 10:03. Natalie could hear in the 2-second delay before Callahan spoke, the quality of a person who had just been given information that required rapid recalibration. "I've been briefed on the 15th name," Callahan said. "I want to be careful with how I respond to that." Deputy Director, Rourke said. With respect, the caution window may have closed. 2 federal officers attempted to intercept Ms. Voss before our 7:30 meeting. Personnel files have been pulled without countersignature in the last hour. Someone with significant authorization has been running active countermeasures since the decode notification. Whoever that person is, I hear you, Commander. A pause. The supplementary files Dr. Solis transmitted. How complete are they? Analysts are working them now, Harlan said. Preliminary assessment is 40 minutes for full decode. I need it in 25. Working on it. In the meantime, Callahan said, I'm issuing a hold on all personnel file access related to the Voss discharge and all 14 names in the original package. That hold will require my personal countersignature to lift. A pause. And I am initiating a parallel inquiry into authorization logs for the file pulls that occurred this morning. That inquiry will be visible, Natalie said. Yes, Callahan said. It will. A deliberate silence. Natalie understood what Callahan was doing, not hiding the inquiry, making it visible on purpose, which was a move designed to either force a response or to demonstrate to anyone watching that the lid was closing from a direction that couldn't be quietly managed. It was a good move. It was also the kind of move that accelerated timelines. We need Solis here, Natalie said. Not at a military facility. Not at a facility in any chain that might be reachable. She's the primary witness, and she has 3 files of evidence that aren't in anyone else's hands. She comes here. Here, Rourke repeated. The hospital. She needs medical care. She's been in the field for 9 days with an ankle injury and 6 days stationary with limited supplies. She is not ready for an interrogation suite, and this is where I am. She paused. I'm the person she asked for. Bring her to me. Callahan said after a moment. Authorize the transport, Commander. Harborview Crest. Direct routing, no intermediate stops. Rourke looked at Natalie. It wasn't quite exasperation, and it wasn't quite something else. Authorized, he said. She went back into the hospital. Not because there was nothing to do in the administration room. There was plenty. But because the hospital was the place where she knew what her hands were for, and she needed that right now. She needed the particular groundedness of walking through a building where the work was concrete and the outcomes were measurable, and the thing she was doing with her body had a direct relationship to whether someone lived or did better than they would have otherwise. Garrett Lowe was out of recovery and in a step-down room on the 3rd floor. She checked his chart at the nurse's station. The post-op notes were good, drainage appropriate, vitals in a reasonable range, and then she knocked on his door and went in. He was awake. Barely, but awake, and when he saw her, something in his face shifted in a way that cost him something. The particular unwilling relief of someone who has been hurt badly enough that the sight of a specific person makes the defenses come down a little before they can stop them. Nurse Voss, he said. His voice was rough. How are you feeling? Like someone took a piece of my lung. He paused. Which apparently they did. The repair was clean. The piece they took was small and non-critical. You're going to have some reduced capacity on the right side for a while, maybe permanently, but functionally. You'll be close to baseline. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Close to baseline, he repeated. That mean I can go back? She looked at him. He was 27. She'd known men at 27 who'd asked that question in hospital beds and meant it completely, and gone back and been fine and gone back and not been fine. And she'd never been able to predict which was which just from looking at them. That's a conversation for your unit physicians and your command, she said. Not for me. But if it was your call, it's not my call, Garrett. He accepted that without pushing it, which told her something about him. The ability to accept a boundary without making it personal, which was harder than it looked and rarer than it should be. The woman who worked on me when I came in, he said. That was you? Yes. Rourke told us before the mission that if things went wrong, there was someone. He didn't say your name. He said the call sign. He looked at her steadily. I want you to know I heard it. I was pretty far out, but I heard it. Someone said phantom, and I thought... He stopped. I thought, okay, if that's who's got me, I might make it. The room was quiet for a moment. You made it, she said. Yeah. A pause. Thank you. I know it's not enough, but thank you. She looked at him in the particular way she had of looking at patients when she was actually seeing them and not just assessing them. Present to the specific weight of who was in front of her, without commentary. Rest, she said. Let your body work. She left him. In the hallway outside, she stood for a moment with her back against the wall and her eyes on the linoleum. The building hummed around her. Somewhere on the floor, a cart went by. A phone rang twice and stopped. She thought about, okay, if that's who's got me, I might make it. She thought about how she'd driven away from Fort Devereaux, believing that the part of herself that inspired that kind of remark had been taken from her by two men with institutional authority and very careful paperwork. She'd been wrong about what was taken. She could see that now with the particular clarity of a person who has spent 6 years in one kind of life and is standing on the edge of understanding it differently. What was taken was the context, the name, the unit, the official record. The thing itself, the hands, the judgment, the capacity, had come with her whether she'd wanted it to or not. It had followed her into every trauma bay and every crisis and every 2:47 a.m. when the windows shook and someone needed what she had. She pushed off the wall and went back to work. Budget. Mara Solis arrived at Harborview Crest at 12:41 p.m. in a military medical transport that came in through the ambulance bay with considerably less drama than the Blackhawks, but with its own kind of weight. Natalie was waiting. Mara was on a stretcher, but awake. More awake than the team leader's voice had suggested she'd be, which was either a good sign or the specific alertness of someone running on something other than physical reserves. She had a field splint on her left ankle, lacerations on her face that had been cleaned but not closed, and the look of a person who had been holding a very large thing for a very long time and was still not entirely willing to put it down. When she saw Natalie, she closed her eyes. Just for a moment. One breath. Then she opened them. You look exactly the same, Mara said. You look terrible, Natalie said. Fair. A thin smile. I feel terrible. Let's fix what we can. She fell into step beside the stretcher, already reading the vitals sheet the transport medic handed her. Dehydration, moderate. Fever, low grade, 101.4, bacterial rather than viral pattern, given the wound presentation. Ankle. The splint had done its job, but the swelling was significant, and she wanted imaging before anyone made decisions. The ankle, when did you come down on it? Day 3. I was moving at night. The ground was uneven. I heard it go. Mara's voice was matter-of-fact in the way that medical people's voices went matter-of-fact about their own injuries, which was both a professional habit and a defense mechanism, and Natalie was not going to call it out right now. I wrapped it and kept moving for most of day 4. Then I reached the relay point and stopped. Stopped moving or stopped everything? Both. We're going to image it. X-ray first, then MRI if I don't like what the X-ray shows. She handed the vitals sheet back. The lacerations on your face, what were those from? Day 1. The exit from the extract site. Mara's jaw tightened slightly. It was a harder exit than planned. They moved through the bay doors and into the ER corridor. Natalie had cleared a bay in advance, not the trauma bay, which still had the specific charged atmosphere of the previous night, but a quieter one with good light and the equipment she wanted. Rourke's team is upstairs, Natalie said. JAG is here. There's going to be a debrief, and I want to tell you that you have the right to request medical stabilization before that debrief begins. I'll back you on that. How long? I'd want a minimum of 2 hours. IV fluids, antibiotics started, imaging done, laceration closure. Make it 90 minutes, Mara said. There are things in those 3 files that need to be in front of people quickly. The 15th name? I heard you, Natalie said. 90 minutes. While Mara was being stabilized, fluids running, antibiotics started, the ankle in the imaging suite showing a significant lateral ligament tear rather than a fracture, which was both better and worse than a clean break in different ways. Natalie was in the administration room watching the supplementary file decode reach completion. Harlan read the analyst's summary aloud. His voice was steady and without inflection, which was the voice of a person who understood that the content didn't need editorial commentary. The first supplementary file was a communication log, 18 months of originating authorizations on intelligence directives that had, through a chain of intermediaries, resulted in 4 compromised extraction operations. The chain was documented. The originating office was documented. And at 3 points in the chain, the authorization signature was not hearts, not prices. It was a code designation that matched an access credential assigned to Alan Mercer's office during his tenure as head of special personnel. The second supplementary file was the financial architecture. 3 cutouts, 2 overseas entities, 1 domestic LLC that had been active for 14 months and dissolved 30 days after the last documented payment. The LLC's registered agent was a name that meant nothing, a professional registered agent service, the kind used for exactly this purpose. But the LLC had a secondary signatory on its formation documents, and that signatory's name, traced through 3 layers of corporate structure, resolved to a holding company with a single beneficial owner. The name of the beneficial owner was Alan Mercer. The room was quiet when Harlan finished. Rourke said, "That's not circumstantial." "No," Trask said. He had his reading glasses on and was looking at the summary on his tablet with the expression of a JAG officer who has just found what he needed and is already organizing how to use it. "That is not circumstantial." Callahan on the line, "I want the full analyst package on my secure server within the hour. Colonel Trask, you're prepared to issue on this?" "I'm prepared," Trask said. "Do it." The third file, Natalie noted, hadn't been discussed. "What's in the third file?" she said. Harlan looked at the screen. Personnel records. 12 individuals whose military or intelligence careers were significantly altered, discharged, demoted, reassigned, within 6 months of raising concerns or conducting inquiries that intersected with operations now identified as compromised. Natalie looked at the table. 12 people, she said. 12 documented cases, Harlan said. There may be more. She thought about a rental car, about a January morning, about the specific shape of a Tuesday in which 2 men had explained to her, with institutional regret, why she was no longer needed. "I'm one of the 12, she said. "Yes," Harlan said. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Pull the other 11. I want to know where they are." Rourke looked at her. "If Solis had 3 files pointing at this and we now have them," she said, "those 11 people have the same standing I have. Whatever is being done to clear the record needs to cover all 12. Trask was already writing. The debrief began at 2:15 p.m. in the administration room, which had by now accumulated enough equipment and personnel to have shed any resemblance to a room where hospital administrators had quarterly budget meetings. Trask led it, methodical and precise, with a JAG lieutenant at his right taking documentation and Callahan's presence maintained through the secure line. Mara sat at the table with an IV line still running and her ankle elevated on a chair that someone had pulled over without being asked. She looked in the specific way that people who have been through serious physical hardship and emerged with their minds intact look, stripped down, alert, without anything left for performance. She told it in order because that was how her mind worked. From the first anomaly she'd noticed 18 months into her intelligence placement, an operational briefing that described assets whose locations she knew to be incorrect, which meant either the briefing was wrong or the asset locations had been fed to the wrong people through the slow, careful process of documentation she'd conducted while maintaining cover, through the decision to build a transmission package rather than report through channels she no longer trusted, through the extract that went wrong. She was precise about what she knew and what she inferred and what she could prove. Natalie watched Trask's face as Mara talked, watched him tracking the distinction between evidence categories, watched him occasionally make a note and occasionally go still in a way that meant he was filing something. At 3:47, Trask said, "Dr. Solis, the supplementary file on communications logs contains 3 points where the authorization traces to an access credential registered to Deputy Director Alan Mercer's office. Can you speak to how you obtained that correlation?" "Yes," Mara said. "The access credential was one I identified through a secondary channel, Not through my official intelligence placement, but through a contact I developed independently who had auditing access to the authorization system. The correlation took 11 weeks to establish cleanly. The contact. Are they willing to cooperate with a formal proceeding? They're prepared to. I have contact protocols in the third file. Trask made a note. Then he looked up. Deputy Director Callahan, I'm satisfied that the evidentiary threshold for a formal inquiry is met. I'm recommending immediate administrative hold on Deputy Director Mercer's access credentials and a notice of investigation for Generals Hart and Price and the 11 additional named personnel. Proceed, Colonel, Callahan said. I'll have the necessary authorizations to you within the hour. Mara looked across the table at Natalie. Something passed between them that wasn't a conversation. It was more like an acknowledgement, the specific exchange of two people who have been through something that most people don't have language for, recognizing it in each other. You look like you have a question, Mara said. Several, Natalie said, but they'll keep. The Phantom's Reach key, Mara said. She hadn't been asked. She answered anyway. I found your service record through a contact at the Personnel Division, a clean contact, before you ask. Someone who helped me understand the shape of what was done to you. I needed a key that couldn't be broken by computational methods alone, something that required contextual knowledge. She paused. Your mission. What you did during Phantom's Reach. That wasn't in any database I had access to. That was in the memory of people who were there. Another pause. I asked around, carefully, over a long time. People remember you, Nat. Natalie held that for a moment. Then she set it down. There was still too much left to do. Tushkub. At 5:18 p.m., the administrative hold on Alan Mercer's access credentials was executed. Natalie was told this by Harlan, who'd received confirmation through the secure channel with the specific flat precision of a man reporting a successful operational step rather than something that should feel as significant as it was. At 5:43, Mercer's office issued a statement through institutional channels. She didn't see it directly, Rourke summarized it, asserting that the inquiry was procedurally improper, that the evidence had been obtained through unauthorized channels, and that Mercer was fully cooperating while reserving the right to contest the evidentiary basis. He's going to fight it, Rourke said. Of course he is, Natalie said. He has lawyers on retainer for exactly this. This is going to take time. Trask says the evidentiary package is clean enough that, I know, and in 6 months or a year it'll be over and the outcome will be what it should be. That's not what I'm worried about right now. What are you worried about? She was at the nurse's station. She drifted back there in the way she kept drifting back to the work. Because the work was real and the work was hers, and the rest of this was going to take longer than one day to resolve into something she could live in steadily. 11 people, she said, the other 11 in that file. We don't know where they all are. Some of them may not know that any of this is happening, and if Mercer still has any reach before the hold takes full effect, we're locating all 11, Rourke said. It started an hour ago. She looked at him. Good. One of them died, he said, quietly. 18 months ago. Apparent accident. He paused. The inquiry will include that. She let that sit for a moment. Let it be what it was. Okay, she said. Natalie. He stepped closer. I want to say something, and I want you to let me finish it. She waited. When you were discharged, he said, I was told that the recommendation had come from your own unit's medical command, that there were concerns about, they used the phrase operational fitness. I didn't dig into it. I had other things, and I didn't dig into it, and He stopped. He was not a man who struggled to complete sentences, which meant when he stopped it meant something. I should have dug into it. Regardless of what I was told, you'd been one of the best people I'd ever worked with, and I accepted a personnel decision about you without questioning it, and He stopped again. I'm sorry. That's what I wanted to say. She looked at him for a long moment. The ER around them was in its late afternoon rhythm. The day team's census, the familiar small sounds of a building that never fully stopped. You're saying it now, she said. Same words as the morning, but different. Something in them had shifted. Yeah, he said. I'll take it, she said. He nodded. He didn't push it further, which was the right call. Mamt. At 6:50 p.m., Brianne Calloway was moved to a surgical prep room for the vascular cleanout procedure. Later than ideal, a scheduling problem that the vascular team had navigated with the specific tension of professionals managing a backlogged day. Natalie stopped in before the pre-surgical team took over, just briefly. "I heard something happened today," Brianne said. "Something bigger than the extraction." "You heard that from whom?" "Corporal Niles. He's been listening to things he probably shouldn't." "Tell him to stop." "He won't." A thin smile. "We're a unit. We listen to things." She looked at Natalie steadily. "Was it about you, the thing that happened?" "Partly." "Was it worth it? Whatever it cost you today to be. To be what you were in that trauma bay last night." Natalie thought about Garrett Lowe saying, "Okay," about Mara in a derelict building for 6 days, about 11 people in a file and one of them dead, about blank spaces on paperwork. "Ask me in a week," she said. Brianne accepted that. "Fair." "Surgery's going to go well," Natalie said. "Dr. Vandermeer does good work." "I know, I looked her up." Brianne paused. "One more thing." "What?" "When this is over, whatever this is, are you staying? Here, the hospital." Natalie looked at her. It was a question she hadn't asked herself yet in those exact terms, and the fact that she hadn't was itself information. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Brianne nodded, as if that was the answer she'd expected. "For what it's worth, the people here, the ones who saw what you did last night, they know now. Whatever they thought before, they know now." Natalie left her to the surgical team. She went back to the administration room one more time because Trask had asked her to review and sign a formal statement. Her account of events as a witness, her identification of the 2 men who had approached her that morning, her prior relationship to the personnel chain now under investigation. She read it through twice before she signed it, the way you read things twice before you sign them when you've learned what signatures attached to official documents can do. She signed it. Trask looked at it, looked at her. "Ms. Voss, I want to inform you formally that the inquiry initiated today will include a full review of the circumstances of your discharge. If the review finds what the current evidence suggests it will find, you will receive formal written notification of the finding, documentation correcting your record, and an acknowledgement of wrongful separation." She absorbed that. "How long?" "For the review? 6 to 8 weeks if it's prioritized, which I intend to request." He paused. "There may also be a determination of eligibility for back compensation. I'd suggest you consult with a civilian attorney in addition to any JAG representation you're offered." "I didn't come here for compensation." "I know," he said. "I'm telling you anyway, because it's your right to know." She nodded. She left. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for a moment and closed her eyes. 6 to 8 weeks. 6 years of a particular kind of life, and 6 to 8 weeks to officially close the door on the version of that life that had been built on a lie. She was aware, standing in that hallway, that she felt something she hadn't been able to identify a name for in a long time. Not relief. It was too early and too complex for relief. Not satisfaction. Too much was still unresolved. Something more like solidity. The specific sensation of standing on ground that was not shifting. She opened her eyes. Her phone buzzed. A text from the secure line, Harlan's contact number. She opened it. Mercer held a meeting at 1600 today. Attendees unknown, so secure facility, no log. 2 hours. Post-meeting, 2 personnel moves. 1 analyst from the Decode team placed on administrative leave. 1 JAG paralegal. She read the next line twice. JAG paralegal assigned to Trask's documentation team. Access to all filed statements. Access to evidentiary package index. She read it a third time. The paralegal had access to everything filed in the last 12 hours. Every statement, every evidentiary index, every name on the witness list, including hers, including Mara's. She walked fast back to the administration room, pushed the door open. Rourke was there, Harlan, Trask. They all looked up at the same time. "The paralegal on your documentation team," she said to Trask. "The one with access to the filed statements. Where is she right now?" Trask's expression changed. He reached for his phone. "She left the building 40 minutes ago. Harlan said, already at his screen. Building log shows her badge swiped out at 6:17. She logged it as an early departure, personal appointment. Rourke stood up. She has the index. The index lists every witness by name, Natalie said. It lists Solis's location. We filed the transport record as part of the evidentiary chain. Mara's in the building, Rourke said. He was already moving to the door. She's in a hospital room. Third floor, Natalie said. Room 312. They moved. The corridor outside was ordinary. Late-day hospital, overhead lights, the particular low noise of a building in its between-shifts hour. They took the stairwell, not the elevator, Rourke ahead, Natalie behind him because there was no version of this where she stayed back, and Harlan behind her. Third floor. She knew this corridor. She'd walked it this morning to see Garrett. Room 312 was at the far end, past the nurse's station, past the linen cart that was always in the same place, past the window that looked out over the parking structure. There was a man in the hallway outside 312 that she didn't recognize. He was standing with his back to the wall and his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at nothing in particular with the particular quality of someone who was trying to look like he wasn't doing exactly what he was doing. Rourke saw him at the same time she did. The man looked up. He saw Rourke's face, and he made a decision in less than a second. The specific, rapid decision of someone whose only remaining option is movement. And he moved. Not toward them, toward the room. Natalie was closer. She ran. She hit the door of room 312 with her shoulder before the man in the hallway reached the handle. The door swung inward. She went in fast and got between him and the bed, Mara's bed, Mara who was upright and already reading the room with the alert eyes of someone who had not been fully asleep. And she turned to face the doorway just as the man came through. He was big, bigger than she'd clocked from down the corridor, with the specific density of someone who'd spent time somewhere that required it. He had nothing visible in his hands. That was the part she kept her eyes on. Hands, always hands, before anything else. He stopped when he saw her. Not because she was a physical obstacle, because she was looking at him in a way that communicated something specific, and whatever it communicated made him recalculate. Step back, she said. Quiet, without the flavor of a request. He didn't step back, but he didn't come forward either. Behind him in the doorway, Rourke. And behind Rourke, the specific sound of two more sets of footsteps from the stairwell coming fast. The man heard it too. She watched him hear it, the slight shift in the eyes, the micro-adjustment of weight. He looked at her. He looked at the door. He made the only calculation left to him and sat down on the floor with his hands visible on his knees, which was the international gesture of a man who has decided that the next 30 seconds do not benefit from any additional decisions on his part. Rourke was in the room. Harlan was in the doorway. Two of Rourke's people who had materialized from somewhere, the hospital, the perimeter, she didn't track the details, were moving efficiently around the man on the floor. Mara was looking at Natalie from the bed. "Are you all right?" Natalie said. "He hadn't touched anything yet," Mara said. "He was reaching for my IV line." Natalie turned and looked at the IV line. The bag, the tubing, the insertion point. She scanned it with the attention of someone who knows what interference with an IV line looks like from every angle. Nothing had been touched. The bag was sealed and uncompromised. She exhaled through her nose. "Okay," she said. "You're okay?" "I know," Mara said, and then after a pause, "Thank you for running." Natalie looked at her for a moment. "You said 6 days in that building." "Yes." "You held on for 6 days, and you're not allowed to have anything happen to you in a hospital bed. That's the rule." Mara made the thin sound that was her version of a laugh. "Copy that." The man on the floor of room 312 was processed with a speed and efficiency that told Natalie this situation had protocols she wasn't fully read into. His name, they learned within 20 minutes, was Carvel. He had a private security contractor credential and a federal consultation contract that, when traced back, resolved to an LLC formed 11 months ago with a beneficial ownership structure that Harlan, looking at it on his screen, said had the same fingerprints as the financial architecture in Mara's second supplementary file. Not Alan Mercer's name on it, but the same construction method, the same cutout strategy. "Same builder," Harlan said. Different project. Trask was on the phone. He had been on the phone for most of the last 40 minutes, and the quality of the conversation, controlled, formal, with the kind of careful language that meant something significant was being organized, had been changing incrementally in a direction that Natalie was beginning to read as closing. At 8:44 p.m., Trask ended the call. He stood in the middle of the administration room and looked at his notes, and then at Rourke, and then at Natalie. Alan Mercer was placed on administrative suspension 40 minutes ago, he said. Access credentials revoked. His office is being secured by IG personnel as we speak. The suspension will convert to a formal notice of criminal investigation within 72 hours pending completion of the warrant package. He paused. General Hart and Colonel Price were served with notices of investigation at 1700 today. They've both retained counsel. They are not to access any personnel systems, classified networks, or communications infrastructure related to their former duties. The room absorbed that. Carvel, Rourke said, detained, federal hold, he'll be processed overnight. Trask looked at his notes again. The paralegal, Dietrich, has been located. She's cooperating. She says she was approached 6 weeks ago by a third party who offered her a consulting arrangement that she now understands was a recruitment. He closed his notebook. She transmitted the document index to a secure drop that we've now identified and locked. Whether Carvel was operating from that index or from a separate instruction channel, we don't yet know. Does it matter? Natalie said. He didn't reach her. It matters for the prosecution, Trask said. For tonight, no. It doesn't matter. For tonight, she let that settle. The specific strange wait of a day that had started at 2:47 a.m. with Blackhawks in an ambulance bay and was ending in a beige administrative room with the smell of bad coffee and the low hum of a secure communications console. Everything between those 2 points had the quality of a thing that had been building for a long time and had finally, in the course of one long bruising day, been allowed to break. What happens now? She said. The inquiry proceeds, Trask said. The evidentiary package is in the hands of the IG and JAG. The supplementary files are secure. Dr. Solis will be debriefed formally tomorrow with medical clearance. The review of your discharge and the 11 other personnel cases will begin next week. He looked at her steadily. What happens now is that the institutional machinery does what it's supposed to do, slowly, with paperwork, and it will work. You're certain? I've been doing this for 19 years, he said. The evidence is clean. The chain of custody is documented. The witness is alive and coherent and willing to testify. He paused. I'm certain. She looked at him. She believed him, which surprised her slightly, because she had not been in the habit of believing institutional certainty for the past 6 years. Okay, she said. Tara. She went back to Mara's room at 9:15 after Carvel had been removed and the security arrangement on the 3rd floor had been reinforced with 2 of Rourke's people in the corridor. She pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat in it, not as a nurse, not as anything official. Just sat. Mara was watching the window. The city outside was dark and still raining, the light from the parking structure making the wet glass glow orange at the edges. How's the ankle? Natalie said. Honestly? Always. It's bad, Mara said. The imaging looked bad. I've been trying not to think about what the recovery is going to look like. Lateral ligament tears are actually... Nat. Sorry. I know the prognosis. I was a surgeon for 11 years. A pause. I just don't want to think about it tonight. Fair. They were quiet for a moment. The building breathed around them. I need to ask you something, Mara said. Ask? When you left, when they discharged you, did you know that it was wrong, that the paperwork was constructed? Natalie thought about that honestly. I suspected, she said. I couldn't prove it, and I had no way to fight it, and I was... She stopped. I was tired. I had been tired for a long time before that Tuesday in January, and the discharge gave me an exit, and I took it. She paused. I've spent some time being angry at myself for that. Don't, Mara said simply. I know. They built it to be unanswerable. That's the point. That's why it worked on 12 people, because they constructed situations where taking the exit was the only rational choice. She turned from the window to look at Natalie. You didn't lose. They cheated. There's a difference. Natalie held that. It was the kind of thing that was easy to say and very hard to actually absorb, and she had been trying to absorb versions of it for 6 years with mixed results. I know there's a difference, she said. I'm still working on feeling it. How long will that take? I'll let you know. Mara looked at her. Her face was bruised along the left cheekbone. The lacerations closed now, with small, neat sutures that the ER team had placed while Natalie was in the administration room. She looked like someone who had been through something real, and that realness was in some way a relief. Not prettied up, not managed, just the actual face of a person who had done a hard thing and was still here. I kept the Phantom's reach code because I knew it would reach you, Mara said, but also because I wanted to, because you deserve to be the one who opened this. She paused. I hope that wasn't selfish. Natalie was quiet for a moment. It wasn't, she said. It was... She stopped. It was right. That's what it was. She didn't leave the hospital until 11:40 p.m. She had no particular reason to stay past the end of her shift, which had technically ended hours ago. But the hospital was where she was, and leaving it felt like a decision that required more energy than she currently had. She checked on Garrett one more time, still sleeping, vitals good, the chest tube drainage clean, and checked on Brienne, who was out of surgery and in recovery with a notation from Vandermeer that the procedure had gone as well as it was going to. She stood at the nurse's station and wrote up her patient notes with the careful completeness she always brought to documentation, because documentation mattered and she had personal reasons for knowing exactly how much. Marcus found her there at 11:20. You should go home, he said. I know. Seriously, you've been here since... He shook his head. You know what? I don't even want to calculate it. Since 10:30 last night, she said. Give or take. Go home, Natalie. She finished the note she was on, saved it, looked at the screen for a moment. Marcus, she said, what did you tell people? About tonight? About what happened? He leaned on the counter. I told the day team that there was a security situation that's been handled. I told Dr. Crane that the military personnel are all patients of record and their charts are in the system. I told the administrator on call that there were federal personnel in the building for reasons I didn't have full information on. He paused. I told nobody anything about you specifically because I didn't know anything about you specifically. I had pieces. What pieces did you have? He looked at her with the steady, undefended look he sometimes had when he was being more honest than the moment required. I had 6 years of watching you work, he said. And I had last night. He paused. Those pieces told me a lot. She didn't know what to do with that, so she accepted it the way you accept things that are true and complicated and don't fit neatly into a response. I'll explain what I can, she said, when I'm able. I know. He straightened up. Go home. She went to her locker. She put on her jacket. She stood for a moment in the locker room to... The specific plain quiet of it, the metal doors, the overhead light that had a slight flicker she'd been meaning to report for 3 months. She pushed up her left sleeve. The tattoo. The marks and the sigil and the name in small letters. She looked at it the way she'd looked at it in this same locker room in the early hours of the morning, but the looking felt different now. Not because the tattoo had changed, because she had. For 6 years she'd covered it. Not from shame exactly. She'd never been entirely sure it was shame, though shame was part of it. More like distance. Like the tattoo was a marker for a version of herself she was trying not to be the distance between her, and it felt necessary. Like if she covered it long enough, the gap would become permanent, and she could be only the nurse and not also the thing the nurse had grown out of. What she understood now, standing in the locker room at 11:40 p.m. with a long day settling into her bones, was that the gap had never been real. The nurse and Phantom had always been the same person. The compassion she brought to every patient she'd ever had, every Gerald with his terrified eyes, every teenager in Bay 4, every 2-year-old with a fever, that came from the same source as the precision in a trauma bay and the knowledge of how to seal a chest under pressure. You couldn't take one without the other. They'd tried to take one without the other, and they'd gotten it wrong. She rolled the sleeve down and put on her jacket and walked out of the hospital into the wet Oregon night. The next 7 weeks were not clean. That was the thing about institutional processes. Trask had been right that the evidence was solid and right that the machinery would work. But machinery worked at its own pace and with its own friction, and Natalie was not insulated from the friction just because she was on the right side of it. There were formal statements, 3 of them on 3 separate occasions, with different combinations of JAG officers and IG investigators, and once a representative from the Senate Armed Services Committee who had a very careful way of asking questions that made it clear he was tracking something she wasn't fully read into. She answered everything honestly and completely and reviewed everything before she signed it, and she asked for the things she needed and didn't apologize for asking. There were 11 other people located, 9 of them alive, scattered. A woman running a community health clinic in New Mexico, a man working private security in Virginia, a former intelligence analyst who'd gone into academia and was, from what the JAG liaison told Natalie, furious in a very controlled and very specific way that suggested she was going to be an extremely effective witness. 2 of the 11 had died in the years since their discharges. 1 ruled accident, 1 suicide. The inquiry would include both. Natalie didn't know most of the 11 personally, but she learned their names and she followed the inquiry reports that were shared with her as a named party. And when there were decisions to be made about how aggressively to push on certain aspects of the record correction, she pushed. Not out of anger exactly. Though anger was present, she wasn't going to pretend it wasn't, but out of the understanding that the 11 weren't a background detail in her story. They were the same story. And if the machinery was moving, it needed to move for all of it. Alan Mercer's administrative suspension converted to criminal referral on day 9. The news broke publicly on day 14, in a report by a journalist who had clearly been working the story from a different angle for months, and had sources Natalie didn't know and didn't need to know. The report named Mercer, named the financial architecture, named the 14 original personnel in the package, careful to note that not all charges were equivalent, that the legal process was ongoing, that Mercer denied wrongdoing. Hart and Price both retained the same law firm, which told you something. Their attorneys issued statements that used phrases like context and procedural irregularity and politically motivated with the smooth facility of people who were paid to generate those phrases under exactly these circumstances. She read the statements once. Then she went to work. Shot. General Hart was formally charged on week 5, Price on week 6. Mercer's charges came in week 7, wire fraud, conspiracy to obstruct federal investigations, and 4 counts related to the operational compromises documented in Mara's package. The charges were not everything Mara had documented. They were what the evidence, cleaned and documented and presented through proper channels, currently supported. Trask had told her from the beginning that not everything would be charged, and not everything charged would result in conviction, and that this was how the law worked. And she had accepted that with the specific acceptance of someone who has learned the difference between what's right and what's provable and lives in the gap between them. She hadn't expected perfect. She'd wanted real, and real was what this was. On the day Mercer's charges were filed, she was in Bay 7 replacing a chest tube on a 45-year-old man named Bart, who had emphysema and a strong preference for explaining his medical situation back to her in terms he'd looked up online. She listened, corrected where correction was needed, and did the procedure with the hands that had always done it. Steady, practiced, the particular competence of someone who had been doing this long enough that it no longer required her to think about it in pieces. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She finished the procedure before she checked it. The text was from Trask. Charges filed. Public record. Official notification to follow by end of business. She put the phone back in her pocket. She stripped her gloves. She said to Bart, "The drainage should improve significantly over the next few hours. I'll check the output when I come back." "What about the online article that says—" "Bart," she said, not unkindly, "the article is describing a general population finding. You are a specific person. What I'm telling you is based on your specific imaging and your specific presentation." He looked at her. "You're pretty sure of yourself." "On this?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Okay." She left the bay. In the corridor, she stopped for a moment. She was aware of the building around her. The afternoon light coming through the windows at the end of the hall, the cart going by. 2 residents talking near the elevator about something that had nothing to do with any of this. The ordinary machinery of the place grinding along. She felt something release in her chest that she hadn't fully known was held. Not dramatic, not a wave. More like a door somewhere in her ribcage that had been stuck for 6 years quietly swinging open on its own, because the obstruction had finally been removed. She stood in the hallway and let it happen. Nobody around her noticed, which was fine. It wasn't for anyone else. 6 weeks after the night of the Blackhawks, Natalie received a letter on official Department of Defense letterhead. Formal language, specific language, the language of a document that had gone through many reviewers before it reached her. It acknowledged her discharge of 6 years prior. It documented the finding that the discharge recommendation had been initiated based on falsified assessments prepared or directed by personnel now under federal indictment. It stated that her service record was being corrected to reflect her actual separation status, not the characterization that had been on the record, but a full honorable separation with documentation of distinguished service. It enclosed a formal apology from the Secretary's office, and it notified her of her eligibility for several things, enumerated precisely, including back pay differential, restoration of certain veterans' benefits, and a formal letter of commendation for actions taken during the period designated by the operational code Phantom's Reach. She read it twice at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee she'd made too strong and hadn't fixed. The morning light was doing something particular through her kitchen window. The specific flat Pacific Northwest light that she'd gotten used to over 6 years, that she'd built a life under. She put the letter down. She thought about a rental car in January, about Wes being the direction she'd pointed because it was the direction she'd pointed, about a hospital that had been hiring and a mountain range that looked like the photograph and the particular exhausted relief of arriving somewhere and deciding it was enough. It had been enough. That was the thing she kept coming back to. The 6 years, the work, the long sleeves in July, the life she'd built out of what was left after they took what they took. It had been real. She'd been a real nurse for real patients in a real place, and Harborview Crest had been her building and her bay and her people, and none of that was erased by the fact that the circumstances had been wrong. The life was still hers. She'd made it under false pretenses imposed on her by other people, but she'd made it, and it was good, and she wasn't going to unmake it. She was going to add to it. She went back to work. Not because she had to, not because the letter required her to, but because she wanted to, which was a distinction that mattered to her more than she could cleanly explain. She put on her scrubs. She drove to the hospital. She walked through the ER entrance at 6:55 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Marcus handed her a terrible coffee and said, "They restocked the supply closet wrong again." And she said, "I'll deal with it," and that was that. She told Marcus the broad shape of it over a break at 9 a.m. Not all of it. Some of it wasn't hers to tell. Some of it was still legally pending. Some of it was simply not ready to be put into words between sips of bad coffee. But the shape, the discharge had been wrong. The record had been corrected. The people responsible were facing federal charges. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. 6 years, he said. Yes. You were here, working, the whole time. Yes. He looked at his coffee. That's... He stopped. I don't have a word for that. Neither do I, she said. She told Dr. Crane later that same day in the corridor outside Bay 2. Shorter version, fewer details. He listened with the expression of a man who was adding information to a picture that had been incomplete and was becoming clearer than he'd expected. The apology I gave you, he said when she finished. The one at the nurse's station that night. Yes? I should have said more. You said what you had, she said. It was enough. He looked at her for a moment. He had the specific, slightly uncomfortable expression of someone receiving a grace they feel they don't deserve, which she recognized because she'd spent years being on the other side of that. You're staying, he said, at Harborview. For now, she said. Yes, he nodded. Good. He paused. You're better than I let myself see. I want you to know I understand that. I know, she said. Thank you for saying it, Sam. Garrett Lowe was discharged on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the night he'd come through the doors. He walked out on his own, slowly, carefully, with the deliberate gait of someone whose body had been through serious repair and was recalibrating its relationship to movement. His unit had sent someone to drive him, a young corporal who was very professional and very clearly in slight awe of him, which Garrett was ignoring with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to it. Natalie was at the nurse's station when he came by. He stopped. "I looked you up," he said. "What I could find, which wasn't much, but enough." "Garrett, I'm not going to make a big thing of it," he said. He stopped, tried again. "My dad was a combat medic, Vietnam. He didn't talk about it much, but when he did, he talked about the medics the way He stopped again. "The way you want to talk about someone who gave you something you can't give back." She looked at him. Young face, big shoulders, the specific quality of someone who has been to the edge and come back and is still figuring out what that means about him. "You don't need to give it back," she said. "That's not how it works." "How does it work?" "You go back to your life," she said. "You do it well. That's all." He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded once and walked out. She watched him go through the glass. The corporal was waiting with a car in the pickup zone. Garrett got in. The car pulled out into the gray October morning. She turned back to the station. 3 months after the night of the Blackhawks, Natalie was asked by JAG to provide a witness statement at a formal proceeding related to the Hart and Price charges. She went. She stated what she knew, answered what she was asked, did not editorialize, and did not soften. The room was formal and high-ceilinged and smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper, and she sat in it with her hands still in her lap and told the truth in plain sentences. When it was over, she walked out into a November afternoon that was cold and clear in the way November afternoons sometimes are in this part of the country. Bright without warmth, the sky a particular clean blue that looked like it had been washed. She stood on the steps outside the building for a moment. Rourke was there. He hadn't been inside. The proceeding hadn't required him, but he was there on the steps with his hands in his jacket pockets, which was the kind of thing that told you something about a person. "How'd it go?" he said. "Fine," she said. "It went fine." "Trask said you were—" "Don't tell me what Trask said," she said, not unkindly. "I was there." He nodded. A pause. "Mara's doing well," he said. "The ankle is responding. She's in physical therapy. She's driving her PT insane." "That sounds right. She asked about you. Tell her to call me herself. She said you'd say that." He almost smiled. Almost. "She said to tell you she'll call when she can walk without the brace." "That's Mara," Natalie said. They stood in the cold for a moment. The street below was ordinary. Traffic, people, the particular and different movement of a city that had no idea what had happened in various rooms and corridors and derelict farm buildings over the past several months. Cities were like that. The world was like that. Things happened inside it that it didn't notice, and then the people they happened to walked back out into it, and the world kept going. She didn't find that bitter anymore. She found it, strangely, steadying. "What are you going to do?" Rourke said. "Going forward." She looked at the street. "Work," she said. "Same as always." "At the hospital?" "Yes." "Just nursing." She turned to look at him. There was something in his face that she read as the beginning of a question he was trying to find a way to ask without it sounding like what it was. "Don't," she said. He held up a hand. I'm not. "You're building toward asking if I'd consider coming back," she said, "to something, in some capacity. And the answer is not right now, and possibly not ever, and I need you to be okay with that." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. "I'm a nurse," she said. "I was a combat medic, and I'm a nurse, and those things exist in the same person, and I'm not going to pretend one of them away anymore, but the work I choose to do is the work in the ER, with civilians, with people who didn't sign up for the hard thing and got hit by it anyway. That's not a lesser thing," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the point." He nodded slowly. He understood, or he was trying to, and the trying was enough. "The 11 people," she said. "The ones in the third file. The living 9. Are they getting the same process I got?" "Same process, same timeline," and the two who died. Both families have been notified. The inquiry is including both cases. He paused. The suicide. The family is, it's hard. There's no other word for it. No, she said. There isn't. She looked at the street again. She thought about the specific weight of what it meant that someone had sat with the same paperwork she'd sat with and made a different calculation and not been here to see this November afternoon. She didn't try to resolve that into anything clean because it didn't resolve. Some things just sat in you, and you learned to carry them without letting them become the thing that defined all the other weight. That was something she'd known for a long time, from a different context. She was applying it here. Take care of yourself, Rourke, she said. Yeah. He put his hands back in his pockets. You too. She walked down the steps to the street. The cold air moved against her face. She had her jacket on, the heavier one, the one from Fort Devereaux, and her left sleeve covered the tattoo, the way it always covered the tattoo, except now the covering was a choice rather than a habit, and that distinction made all the difference in how it felt. She thought about what it takes to carry two versions of yourself for 6 years and never let either one go. She thought about how most people, if you pressed them, were doing something like that, carrying the person they used to be alongside the person they'd had to become, moving through ordinary days with an invisible, complicated weight that nobody asked about because nobody knew to ask. She thought about how often that weight came from something that had been done to them. An institutional lie, a closed door, a carefully constructed piece of paper with too many blank spaces, and how rarely the people carrying it got to see the day when the blank spaces were filled in. She'd gotten to see it. Not cleanly, not completely. Not without ongoing proceedings and unanswered questions and the slow grinding machinery of accountability that would run for another year at minimum before anything was fully resolved. Not without the man who died in a derelict farm building somewhere and the families of two people who were not here to receive any letter of correction. But the door had swung open. The obstruction had been named and moved. She had stood in a formal room and told the truth in plain sentences, and the truth had been sufficient. She reached the sidewalk and turned toward the parking structure. The November light was still that particular clean blue. A woman walking the other direction glanced at her briefly. Ordinary stranger, brief intersection, gone. Nobody who knew what she was carrying, nobody who needed to. She knew what she was carrying. That was enough. She was a woman who had been dismissed and discharged and driven west in a rental car with 2 duffel bags and the stubborn, unerasable fact of everything she was. She was a nurse in an ER in a city she'd chosen by pointing a car in a direction, and she was good at it, and the goodness was real regardless of what any paperwork had ever said. She was a person who had run down a hospital corridor at 6:58 p.m. to stand between a man and a door, and she had not thought about the choice, because some things are not choices. They are just what you do, and that is not a liability. That is the only thing worth being. She was not 2 different people. She was everything she had survived. She walked to her car, and she drove back to the hospital, and she went to work.